This is a podcast for nice guys. How do you want to be remembered? Someone who sacrificed everything, or a man who got what he wanted while positively influencing others along the way? Join us to learn how to lead from the bedroom to the boardroom from the only international coach for nice guys, your host, Ashley Cox.
Welcome back to a podcast for nice guys. Today we have Jack Hunter Cohen, who is a certified life coach and mentor. He works with those in positions of leadership to integrate spiritual principles into every aspect of their lives. His passion is in shifting consciousness and service to the individual and the collective. Starting in his late teens, he immersed himself in metaphysical teachings to make sense of the world. His curiosity eventually led to a meditation practice, which gave him access to his inner archetypes. These archetypes inspired him to embark on a 5-year journey. During that time, he discovered the power of listening without prejudice to people's stories, and that as he did so, material that hadn't previously been accessible would rise to the surface to be observed and released. He is currently offering one-on-one coaching for a select few and a group program called the Witness Circle to offer greater numbers of people a unique, transformative experience. Thank you so much for being here today, Jack.
Thank you for inviting me, Ashley.
I have to say, the last time we spoke, I left that conversation feeling so empowered and lit up and in my feminine as a woman. And so I really am looking forward to having you speak to my audience, because if these men can make their wives or women feel the way that I felt after just a short hour-long conversation, then the world would be a different place. And I think that the tools that you use were the biggest contributing factor to that. You talk about non-judgment and presence and active listening and really communicating and not just waiting for your turn to speak. And so let's dive into this nice guy material for my audience so they can make their partner feel as great as I felt the other day.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying all that. That feels really good. Appreciate it.
It's incredible the power that men have. And I don't know if they know it or recognize it, that they can literally make a woman feel incredible or make a woman feel not so incredible. And I think that my audience really want their women to feel good. They want to please their women. And where it gets messy is that you're sort of mixing the innate masculine urge to want to please a woman with usually some childhood material around pleasing the mother. And things start to get a little complicated. And so I'd love for you to just start talking about that a little bit. Maybe we can enter the conversation there. What's the difference, or how do men move through the difference between the man inside of them, the conscious part of them wanting to light up and please their partner and doing so from a very integrous space versus the little boy inside unconsciously trying to please his mother? It can look the same on the surface, but it can feel very differently to women.
Yeah, it goes both ways. The woman has to be receptive, and women have to understand, I think, the power that they have, because really it starts with the woman, because the woman's the one who chooses. The woman can choose to shut down, or they can choose to be open, and that's on their end. That's a real critical piece, because if a man is not received, if what he is offering is not being received, then there's nothing you can do about that. So yeah, the man has a lot of power in that he can, just by putting his attention on a woman and just being loving toward a woman, he can create this safe space for a woman to open up and to feel the way you felt. But you're prepared to receive that, and that's a big part of it,
So you're putting the power back in my hands a little bit and saying, no, this wasn't all me. You wouldn't have gotten that effect if you weren't receptive to what I was offering you.
Totally.
Interesting. Well, thank you.
Yeah. And when men are feeling rejected, then something gets activated in them, which has them grasp, which has them want to please, because, again, they're projecting their mother into this woman. And there's that wound in them that gets activated. So it goes both ways. And then women have wounds around their fathers. It's like they weren't seen, they weren't heard, their fathers didn't know how to handle them. This is like a particular thing with beautiful women, because fathers don't know how to handle their daughters. They don't know how to be with their daughters. If they hadn't done their work, if they've got their own trauma, that's another interference in that field.
I think right now, collectively in the world, men are moving through their mother wounds. This material, this mother wound in men, is coming up for clearing. It corresponds with how present his mother was, with how nurturing his mother was. And so if there's a wound around that, that gets, even if she was perfect, anxious, she didn't do anything wrong. It's like, oh, I had a great childhood. She may not have been emotionally really present and available and in her body. There's a big difference. So when he's confronted with a woman who's embodied, it can be very uncomfortable because it's rubbing up against his capacity to be present with a woman who's embodied.
Yeah. Ultimately, it wouldn't work unless he's doing work on himself to get around that, unless the woman is actually patient enough to, I guess, help teach him. But he has to be willing to be taught. That's a big leap to take, because if you're not used to interacting with a woman of a certain caliber, it's just not, it's not going to compute. It's going to feel like, I can't trust this because this is not something I recognize. It's going to feel like this is not honest. It's like, it's not a static thing, because when you first start a relationship with someone, you have an impression of them. But as you go further into the relationship and time moves on, the relationship changes and you each start projecting, taking the projections of the other person. But if you don't take the projection, if you resist the projection, if you're not actually that person, it won't stick. And then the relationship won't hold together. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to just really put your attention on the other person and really be present and really see this person in front of you and hear this person in front of you, so that they know that you're seeing them and that you're feeling them, and it's them that you're seeing and feeling, and not some idea that you have that you're projecting onto that person.
That fantasy, or the proclivity to have those fantasies and those projections, is really common with nice guys. They'll pedestalize a woman, they'll fantasize about her. And so to your point, from that perspective, it's difficult to see who's really in front of you when you need something from her, when you need her to be a certain way in order to match your fantasy, or in order to match the pedestal that you have her on. And she ultimately falls from it at some point, and then the relationship has a breakdown. So instead, what you're saying is, what does it look like to really see and hear this person, be present with this person, feel this person, not judge this person? And so I'm getting the correct, or as close to reality, I'm getting the correct data, or getting as close to reality as possible, instead of creating an alternate reality and trying to make my current reality match that alternate reality that's in my head that I need.
Right. But the real trip is that if they're doing it, you're probably doing it too. If the man's doing it, the woman's probably doing it as well. They're probably mirroring it. So if you're seeing it in the other person, you're doing it to an extent yourself. And again, it can be both ways. Women can be projecting things on a men because they want them to be a certain way. They need to believe they are this. And then they pedestalize the men. And then the men come down. And that's when all of a sudden, on the men's side, well, she was very present there one moment, but all of a sudden something happened and she just shut down. Because women can shut down very, very quickly if something in their system is saying, oh, I can't trust this guy.
Yeah, that's so true. I personally can shut down in an instant. And I will also say that I've been in a relationship before with a nice guy who I did pedestalize, and I had this idea of who he was and what I needed from him. I needed him to be this strong masculine provider, this archetype. And then I became perpetually disappointed 4 to 6 months in, and on, because he kept missing the mark that I had in my head for him.
And then oftentimes we manipulate to get the other person to act the way we want them to act. So we won't say the thing. We'll not be honest. We'll create this illusion for the sense of safety, but really what you're doing is you're undermining the possibility of having an actual relationship with this actual human being, which is where, which was where everything is, when you can get underneath all that, and when you can really see this person and not get, not be hung up on your own stuff and worrying and in your own head, and just really being present. That's everything.
And to your point, he did the same thing to me. You're right. We were both doing it. And there came a moment where it's like, are we going to go into this material, this shadow material, these expectations, these projections, or are we going to break up? There's a breaking point that happens when someone can't get underneath that, when the couple can't get underneath that. It ends up, somebody cheats, they get a divorce, they break up, somebody sabotage it, one or both people sabotage it, somebody, maybe they gain weight or develop health issues. So this is a big deal.
When we're not mindful and we're not conscious, people do weird shit. It's not, it doesn't make sense. You really can't explain it. And you can drive yourself crazy trying to nail down what this thing was to try to make it safe moving forward. But really the only thing you can do is stay present. Don't make judgments. Assume that the other person is operating with integrity unless they prove otherwise. And then ask questions. But oftentimes we're actually afraid to talk to each other. We're afraid to be vulnerable enough to ask the question that's actually on your mind. Are you really here? Are you with me in this moment? Do you want to be somewhere else? Because if you'd rather be somewhere else, you should be somewhere else. And if you want to be here, then let's be here. Let's be present. Let's make the most of this moment. Because you're either loving each other, or I don't know if it's this extreme. I don't know if I want to make this general statement, but it's like you're either loving each other or you're not, or you're withholding. And relationships are not the places to withhold if you want a healthy relationship. They're the places where you want to open up. But it takes a lot of guts to do that. It's very, very vulnerable. And you set yourself up for a lot of pain if you haven't worked through your pain already.
I agree. What does it look like, in your opinion? This is a hot topic in the masculinity coaching world. What does it look like for a man to be vulnerable? Let's assume that he gets to the place where he's comfortable asking her questions. He's comfortable saying, how does that make you feel? And what do you need right now? We cover that in my other podcast episodes. But what does it look like for him to be vulnerable in a masculine way?
I think the first part, it starts with being comfortable with yourself. It comes to being secure enough in yourself so that when you ask the question, you don't have anything riding on the response. But if you don't feel like you can say yes or no freely, if you don't feel like you can be honest, if as a man, I'm getting my feelings hurt and you're having to take care of my feelings, then you're not going to feel as if you can be open and honest with me. You're going to feel like you have to caretake. And that you're not going to be happy about. Because again, you don't want to be this guy's mother. You want to be their partner, and you want to be held, and you want him to hold a container that you can surrender into. But men are not trained to be that. There are a lot of people doing men's work that are being trained these things by one coach or another, by one person or another. And it's all good work. It's all steps. And I think ultimately, I think what we want to do is whatever we need to do to keep our hearts open, do that. And keep your heart open and speak from that place. But again, both sides have to be prepared to do that, to be able to give and receive that. It has to be reciprocal. It has to be given both ways in that respect. And with that, I just wanted to add that men and women process information very differently. We are very, very different. Underneath all of this, we're all human beings and we have very similar experiences, and we all have masculine and feminine in us. But generally speaking, women are very different creatures than men. What feels right to a woman isn't necessarily going to feel right to a man. And so we need to kind of learn each other's language and not expect men to think like women or women to think like men. It's like coming together and with the intention to collude with each other for the benefit of both.
It really is this spiritual experience and the biggest personal growth experience anyone can undertake, to sort of figure out how to bridge that gap when I may not agree or I may not see things the same way, or my material is coming up and I'm getting activated. How do I bridge that gap and still be in a place of love, whether or not we continue to be together? How can we navigate this in a loving, healthy way, in a way that works for both of us, and take the clinginess and neediness off of the table, which is just the inner child?
Yeah. I think a key is slowing down, is as having an understanding that if things start going off the rails, if things start feeling like you're not able to communicate sufficiently in that moment, there needs to be the understanding and the consent to slow down and stop if necessary, if either person is getting activated in that way. Because if you just keep going, if you power through, you're going to cause damage. It's in the very least, it won't be helpful.
Sounds like it's really important for the man to be attuned, for both of them, but especially, even you, and how present and non-judgmental you are. I can feel my own edges in my body of my comfort with being so seen and so heard, and to be with someone who's so present, because that's not familiar to me in my subconscious mind from childhood. And I can literally feel the parts of me where I'm like, I'm noticing the tension, and then it releases. So if you were to sort of ignore, and this is all energetic, right? But if you were to ignore where I'm at, then I wouldn't be having the same experience. But you're clearly very like present and attuned, and it's sort of pushing up against my edges. And it's actually a conscious choice on my behalf to relax a little bit more and a little bit more. And you're not being overbearing. You're literally just being present and attuned and non-judgmental, and sort of meeting me where I'm at, and then pushing a little bit past that, which is such a beautiful representation of the masculine, where he's sort of poking around literally sometimes to see where the edges are and where the comfort level is. And it's up to her to go, I trust this man or I don't. And sometimes it's the man, sometimes it's her trauma, sometimes it's both. So this is really delicate material here, and it's a little complex because it's layered, it's multi-layered. It's not just the relationship material or the person, but also the childhood material as well.
Yeah, it's all of that. That's why it's such an important inquiry. And I think if we're just curious about each other, if our questions are not leading, if they're not presumptuous, if we're just genuinely interested in there's a human being across from me, and I want to know as much as I can about this person, because I don't want to just hear them. I want to feel them, and I want them to feel me as well. And if you start with that, that's another really beautiful way in, because it's like we're all lovers and we're all healers. We all have just this infinite capacity to love and this infinite capacity to heal and to be healed.
I think that women don't feel nice guys because nice guys have essentially become energetically flaccid.
Well, when you say nice guy, how do you define that?
I'm defining that as someone who betrays themselves and puts themselves below everyone else in order to make them happy in an effort to get a desired outcome. So if I take out the trash and do the dishes and do all these things, then she'll respect me, she'll love me, she'll care for me, she'll meet my needs. It's this if then mentality. And it ultimately ends in self-betrayal because
Right.
you're constantly focused on everyone else, and you would think that's admirable, you would think that that's a good thing. It's like, oh, I'm being of service, this is what men do, we come last, the family comes first. And there is some truth to a man being in service, but ideally from overflow. So that's the piece that's missing, is that this sense of service is supposed to come from overflow, where you've already filled up your own cup. To your point earlier, I already know how I feel about things, I'm already taking care of myself, I'm not coming from a place of neediness. So because I'm already filled up, I can show up present, and I can show up authentically because I don't quote unquote need anything from you. I'm just being honest and being who I am.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a great definition. Really, men have an expectation that they're going to take care of the other, and that's where their value is. Unfortunately, it does not come from a clean place. If you've been brought up with this idea of this is what it means to be a good man, and you try to actually do that without it being embodied, in other words, you're going through the motions of it, but there's not actually the desire to do this thing. You're doing this to get, as you say, to an outcome. That's not going to feel good. And it's going to leave you open to manipulation as well. When they're not feeling safe, or when there's stuff that they haven't dealt with, then they do that. So it's like this kind of like this subtle war that ends up in a lot of resentment. And it's like this idea of you're not living up to the unspoken contract. But if the contract is unspoken, it's not a contract.
What you said is exactly what we're doing here, which is we are shifting and shaping everything that men have been taught. I love what you said about that. You're like, yes, this is societal programming, and it doesn't mean it's healthy. It doesn't mean that it's what we need to be doing. It doesn't mean that it's going to create a healthy, long-lasting relationship with self or others. The suicide rate for men is almost 3.8 times out of women. And men have more heart attacks and more blood pressure issues and more health issues in general, because they have been taught to self-abandon and self-sacrifice in an effort to prove their value, prove their worth. And it makes sense. It's primal. It's like in a tribal situation, the men are the protectors and the providers. They're making sure that, the bears don't come eat the children, and they kill the bear so we can eat the bear instead, And so it makes sense that they would derive their value from that. But we're also evolving as a species to say, okay, there's more here, and there's more to you as a human being than whether or not you can kill the bear or whether or not the bear kills you. It's kind of a zero-sum game, right? And instead, we're going to move on to real connection, and those things are going to happen naturally. So you can still protect, you can still provide, but we're shifting the intention and how things are done.
Yeah. Well, it's all that, actually. Men are men, and we do have this need as men to provide protection as well. We do need all of that as well. And at the same time, like you say, underneath all that, we're human beings. And we have as much in common as we have separating us. And I think that rings true, or that is true for anything that or any people that you want to point to. It's like men and women, they're as much alike as they are different, and they're as different as they are alike. Races, genders, however you want to categorize it, you can always see what you have in common with someone. You can always see what your differences are. You get to choose, and you get to decide how you feel about those differences. And so often people are weary of the differences of other people, as opposed to being willing to see this is another human being, and we can celebrate our differences as long as we're not imposing our will on other people, that's where we run into trouble. Where one person is intending to impose his will on somebody else. And that's rape. That's not anything that that's going to lead to a useful connection discussion. That's just going to be more war.
But this is exactly where this whole topic gets interesting, because the people listening to this podcast might say, that's literally what I'm trying to do. I'm trying not to do, depending on how you look at it. But I don't want someone to feel imposed upon. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the overpowering, inflexible, it's my way or the highway guy. And so now I've gone way the other way. But I would argue, and this is what I'm trying to make conscious within the people listening, I would argue that it's still manipulative to betray yourself, to say no when you mean, or to say yes when you mean no, to be inauthentic, to lie or to live a lie, etc., in order to gain a desired outcome or to avoid an undesired outcome. So I don't want her to get mad at me. I want to avoid an argument. I want to avoid being abandoned or rejected. And so I'm constructing this whole reality in order to, even if it means self-betraying, in order to keep the peace. And even that is still an imposition, and women feel that and they're repulsed by it.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about the distinction between fear and love. You know, the things that you're describing, the manipulations, the self-betrayal, the wanting to avoid, the wanting to get a desired outcome, it's all based in fear. If you're neutral about it, if you're okay with whatever the outcome, and your intention is to have the best possible outcome for everyone involved, then you're coming from a completely different place, which is unusual and which people with good reason don't trust, because the world does not operate in this place where everybody is loving one another. You know, we live in a world where we have challenges, but those challenges are man-made at this point. We don't need to survive out in the wilderness now to live. The challenges now are man-made. But fear versus love, if you keep your heart open and you do what that dictates, then you can say anything to anyone. If you're coming from that place, that is the one thing. I mean, it sounds really hokey. It sounds really corny, but that's the one thing that will obliterate fear is love. But love in its purest form, not love that looks nice. Love is fucking brutal. To love somebody is like, that is a fierce thing, because it means that you're willing to respect them enough to actually say the truth, and respect and have faith that they can take it, have faith that they can actually hear it. You and I have done a lot of work around this. So we're much more aware of these things than most people are.
I could totally hear my listeners saying, well, if I tell her my truth, she's going to get so mad. You know, that maybe, let's just say the truth is, I don't ever feel good enough for you. So what would you say to a man who's in that place? I just never feel good enough for her, but I know if I tell her that, it's going to be World War III. And so now I'm stuck.
I wouldn't say I don't feel good enough, because that sounds like you're feeling sorry for yourself. When you use the phrase, I don't feel like I'm good enough for you, that's not going to be, I don't think a woman's going to want to hear that. I think a better statement would be, I don't feel like I can win with you. How do I win with you? Tell me how I win with you.
That pause is everything.
Yeah.
You're really good at pausing.
Yeah, when you ask a question, you've got to give them a chance to answer it. And if you're asking a confronting question like that, you have to be willing to take that breath. And when you do that, you're giving them permission to take their time and actually feel into it and answer the question.
That's the nuance there, is in the former scenario. And really what it would be is Nothing I ever do is good enough for you. That's what I hear the most. Not just I don't feel good enough. Nothing I do is good enough for you. That's not an inquiry. And what you
No,
said is an
yeah,
inquiry.
yeah. Well, saying saying that, it's accusatory and it's whining. It's like, how is a woman's pussy going to respond to that?
Right. That's what it's energetically flaccid. So she has nothing to respond to. And they dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole, trying harder and harder and harder, no pun intended, to get her to respond positively, but it just gets worse and worse and worse until she cheats or they get a divorce.
Underneath that statement is, I want you to fix me, or I want you to fix this thing. I want you to do something, or I want you to say something to make me feel better. Instead of stating it in a way, what you actually want is to make this person happy, as opposed to, I want to make myself feel better. And that's the mother wound. That's the thing where you're projecting your mother onto this woman and you're expecting her to be your mommy.
Powerful. And the differentiator is, in one instance, he's taking personal responsibility for that mother wound, for that neediness. And he's not whining. He's not in a victim mentality. He's going, wow, this is really uncomfortable. This really hurts. I'm going to go handle this. And then he can approach his woman again and ask her real questions from a neutral place with genuine curiosity and inquiry.
Yeah. And I wouldn't call it neediness. I would just say, this is what this man desires to please this woman, because that's what we want to do. We want to please you. That's what emboldens us. That's what makes us feel like men. When we win with you, that's everything.
So how does a man determine if it's that or the mother wound?
How does he feel? What is your impulse? What is it your impulse to say to this woman to get this, to shift this thing? Because the difference between saying, I feel like I'm not good enough for you, I suppose it's funny because on the surface it sounds like he's being vulnerable, but that's not vulnerability. I don't see that as a vulnerability. I see it more as, it's a complaint, and it's, I want you to fix this. And the other thing is more of an invitation. It's like, how do I need to be? It's funny, I wrote a song with this line in it. I'm going to quote my song. How do I need to be for you to see I am your friend, I'm not the enemy?
Beautiful.
And it's like, not just in this moment, but from this moment forward. And it takes a lot of awareness, and it takes support. It's not something you can do on your own. You have to have support. That's why we have coaches. It's because none of us can do this stuff alone.
Well, to your point, I don't think I have felt what I was talking about earlier about how I receive you. That wouldn't be happening if you weren't here. And so it does take two. And we're sort of playing together, and the energies are mixing and mashing. And so whether it's with your partner or with a coach or whatever, it's always this moving, evolving, ever evolving energy where let's say if I'm in a relationship with someone, there's material that's coming up. So then I take the material to my coach, I get the skills, I get the tools, I go back to the relationship, I revisit that thing. It's these constant co-creations. So I love what you're saying. Like, if we lived in a bubble and didn't have the relationship or the coach, or the relationship without any guidance, or the guidance without a relationship, or nothing to practice it on, it's just different. It lands differently. But when we're confronting all of it in real time with other humans, ideally consciously, really beautiful things can unravel, and people shift and change.
Yeah. I mean, this gets into a whole nother, this is what I keep repeating to people, what I keep impressing upon people, is that we're having a relationship with ourselves, even when we're in a relationship with other people. Is what we're receiving from other people, we're interpreting it. And the slower we are and the more deliberate we are, the more likely we are to actually hear what that person is saying. It takes a lot of work. And I like to impress upon people that we really are having conversations with ourselves, because we really are part of one thing. They can open things up for us. Because there's a reason you and I are having this conversation. We don't necessarily know what that reason is. It could be that we're having this conversation because something will open up for you, or will open up for me, that is a piece, of a missing piece that we got from one another. We have no idea. So a big part of it, I think, an important part of it, is not being tied to a particular outcome. Is just being willing to receive what's here to receive, and to be as generous as you can be.
And it's difficult to do that if someone isn't taking care of themselves, which comes up
Well,
against our patriarchal training of the self-sacrifice.
well, when someone is sacrificing themselves for the sake of someone else, that generally is not a very healthy thing. And there are moments where we feel compelled to sacrifice for someone else, which can be a really beautiful thing. If it's like an emergency, if somebody needs assistance, if they get hit, whatever, you figure it out. But you know what I mean. But what we're talking about, what you're talking about, is like run-of-the-mill self-abandonment for the sake of being liked, for the sake of keeping peace, for the sake of whatever. And very few of us grew up in environments, I know I wasn't, where it's safe to say whatever was coming into your head, the honest thing. It sounds like, so much of what we are programmed to do is to shut out reality, is to distract us from actually saying what's really, or seeing what's really going on.
I love what you're saying, because I hear men say all the time, I had a perfect childhood. That is, and to your point, you're like, I didn't have a perfect childhood, but what I'm getting at is when they say they had a perfect childhood, that's an indicator that they weren't allowed to say what was really on their mind. That's an indicator that they weren't allowed to be fully expressed. So whether it was a violent, traumatic, overly or outwardly traumatic childhood, or quote unquote perfect childhood, in both instances, that child had to color inside the lines that their parents drew for them, meet certain expectations. And it's really confusing when your parent wasn't consistent with their expectations and you had to guess. But either way, it's like they don't feel comfortable being fully expressed and authentic, especially around women. If the mother was really anxious and was reactive and couldn't handle the boy being messy and being a boy, the things that boys do, because it didn't fit within her box of perfection and what was appropriate, and she didn't want other people to see anything other than this perfect little boy, this good boy. So it's fascinating. And whether it's that, or again, she just couldn't handle her own material and she was reactive and nasty or abusive, because same thing, like her bandwidth for anything outside of what she could handle was low.
Yeah. And anything outside of that range is threatening. And if you're this image and you have to be the mother, or you have to be the father, you can't be perceived as weak. You have to have your shit together. That's another part of it. Very few people, I think, have had ideal childhood. And I think one of the problems with the world in general is that all of the programming and all of the expectations were from another time. They were inappropriate and they just held forth. And so there are a lot of confused people. And like you said, the suicide rate is that someone would be so desperate and feel no other alternative than to take their own life. It's such a horrible, tragic thing. How alone you must feel. And I mean, most of us have thought about it, but to do that and to know that that actually is happening out there, I think it is incumbent upon all of us to create a world where people don't have the desire to do that anymore.
I would argue that your work saves lives in that way. The witness circle itself, where people go and they express in a non-judgmental, safe place, is sometimes, or it sounds like what you're saying, actually the cure. I just want to be seen and heard and felt, and I need to know what that feels like in my body, because this isolation is literally killing me. This lack of connection is literally killing me. And what do you think the line is, or what do you think the dance is between self-witnessing and being witnessed by others? Let's just say if someone does feel terribly alone and maybe they don't have, I mean, they could always reach out to you to join the witness circle, but what if they don't have people in their lives that can really be present and non-judgmental and really see and feel and hear them? Can they do that for themselves? And what does that look like?
Well, I created this thing because I didn't have a place to go. I had no one to turn to. And I realized that I was giving that to people while I was interviewing them. I was making a documentary and I was interviewing people and they were telling me their stories, and I would see the impact it had on them being able to tell their story to an interested listener. And I thought, that's a real gift. And that's what I would want. I would want somebody to simply hear what I had to say without trying to fix it or without trying to make me feel better or without commentary, but just to actually hear the story with compassion, with empathy, and validating it, because that was my experience. And so I think that is a big part of it, is being validated, being loved, being honored, being cherished, and having a space where you can receive that. Because if you're having a hard time, where do you go? And how do you know how to express what you need if you weren't taught to ask for what you needed? It's like a closed loop. You haven't any experience of reaching out for help in a way that will be received. And so it's clumsy and it doesn't feel safe. And so there are so many obstacles to being able to be heard that I think it would be useful to have a place where people can go to just tell their story. And it doesn't have to be a traumatic experience. It can simply be a place where, everyone here is heard. And if I do my job well, I will be modeling for people how to listen and how to ask questions that are curious questions, that are you're genuinely interested. And that if you find something is said that is triggering to you, that is like hitting a spot for you, that you recognize that and you own it. And you don't then turn around and try to push it away, but really take that and honor that you're having that response, owning it, and knowing that it is your response. You own that response. It's nobody else's. Nobody's making you feel any way.
Yeah, to your point, if you right now were to say something egregious and it didn't resonate with me at all, I would be like, you must be having a really rough day. It would just sort of, but if there's a part of me that believes it, then I get triggered.
Yeah, if there's a part of you that questions, what he's saying? Is there truth in that? And that'll mess you up.
I really want to circle back to something you said that was, I think, the crux of this conversation and what I want men who are listening to take away from this conversation, which is a couple of minutes ago, you said, I will listen, or it's such a powerful gift that you can give someone to listen to them non-judgmentally and to not try to fix it. You are a master of that. And if every man and woman, but since this podcast is for men, if they can take that little nugget and just start practicing it, there's a piece of them that wants to make their woman feel better when she's upset, when she's not happy. And that's where they get into trouble. It really is it's like, how do I make you feel better so that I can feel better, or so that I can save you, or there's a kink or something happening there. And instead you're like, no, let's bring it way back, bring it way down and go, you know what? I want to be genuinely curious. I want to genuinely listen. I'm not listening to fix. I'm not listening to take it personally. I am really in a neutral, present place. And that is that's one way to make a woman just like completely glow and open up and unfold, because she doesn't feel like a project. She doesn't feel disempowered, like she needs to be fixed. She can just be where she's at. And guess what? If you do that, it'll pass in like 30 seconds or a minute, and then she'll feel a different way. And so,
Yeah, she'll
right,
have another emotion.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
How do you get to that place? What is your daily routine like, or your self-care, or the processes that you do with yourself? Because it starts with you filling up your own cup so you have the capacity to be present for others. That is no small feat. Your ability to be as present as you are and to be as non-judgmental as you are has taken a lot of effort on your part. And so what does that look like?
For me, what it looked like is a lot of aimless sort of floating around, not knowing what end was up. And then I came into a meditation practice, a partnered meditation practice, almost 10 years ago now, that it was an intimate practice, orgasmic meditation. And through the practice, I was able to connect with women on a very deep level. And it was outside of the head. And it was a very embodied experience. And you could feel the sensations in your body. And you could feel the sensation that was like, it wasn't her and it wasn't me. It was both of us. And what happened as a result of that practice was I was able to open up more, and I was able to feel more, and I was able to just feel more connected to other people through that. But mostly, I think it's just a lot of, generally speaking, a lot of hit and miss, a lot of just being in environments where the intention was to connect. And there were a lot of detours. And I took what made sense to me from different places, but ultimately I had to trust my own intuition. But it took a lot of time, Ashley. There's not a formula I could give to your listeners because we're all individual. I can help people now because I have this stuff in my system and I've had a lot of experience, but it's not been easy. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to feel your pain as much as you can. And you have to give yourself a break when you need to take a break. You have to honor that in yourself. And the more you stay in it, the more you keep going back into that sort of cauldron, the more your capacity expands. It just takes a lot of time. It helps if you have mystical experiences, naturally or through plant medicine or through whatever it is, to get a sense of the oneness, that we're not separate from each other, and to just use that as the North Star, because that's the thing that I need to keep coming back to, because that's the thing that transcends all the stories, all the trauma, all whatever it is. That one thing, that we are in reality, we are all part of one thing. We're all connected in that, intimately, inextricably bound by that. And to pretend otherwise is to buy into the illusion of separation. And again, this feels like it's kind of out there, but it's true. We are that, and we are also separate. And the fact that we're separate is a massive distraction. And the fact that we can have sex with one another, that's a big distraction. The fact that we can argue with one another, that's a distraction. Netflix is a distraction. All those things, as great as they can be and as enlightening as they can be, they can also just take us so far away from ourselves that we keep losing who we are. And so with male-female dynamics, with whatever, and it doesn't have to be male and female necessarily, but with that, the connection that we feel and the love that we feel for one another, one to one, I think that it's our best hope, and it can be the biggest pitfall if we haven't really owned our shit. And if we come to it having not done the work, we end up doing our work through relationships, which is another way I've learned through a lot of relationships that didn't work. But I think we just need to stay connected to each other. And I think we need to really honor who we feel comfortable with or who we trust, and to really honor ourselves and not settle for people who are not respectful or people that don't have us not feel the way we would most like to feel.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of needless suffering because people just want to connect. So,
And if they're trying to keep themselves safe, it's difficult to form that connection.
if they're trying to keep themselves safe, if you're trying to keep yourself safe, you're not going to allow yourself to live life because life isn't safe. It's just not. And I don't mean to sound dramatic about that because I don't think that's a bad thing. When I say it's not safe, I don't mean you're risking your physical life, but parts of us have to die for us to have something greater. The thing we did today that had us be here today is not going to work to get us to tomorrow. So another thing is do something scary every day. Do something challenging every day. Do something to disrupt your system every day. And seek out people who will support that. Not that you do anything dangerous, but do things that challenge you. Do things that will keep you engaged and on your toes. That will keep you activated. That will keep you wanting to get up and do things out in the world where eventually we're just going to die. You know.
Well, that does a couple of things. It builds confidence and it increases someone's window of tolerance for uncomfortable emotions, which is crucial in the context of what you're talking about. So if I'm sitting and I'm not being judgmental, I'm listening non-judgmentally, I'm present, that requires me to increase my bandwidth and my window of tolerance for those uncomfortable emotions. And so you're saying be proactive about it. Go make yourself uncomfortable in other ways so you can then come back to your relationship and you'll then have that window of tolerance to be non-judgmental with your partner. You'll be able to be more present with your partner because you're able to regulate in real time. You're able to give yourself what you need in real time so you can really be with this person.
Yeah. It's complicated because we're all so different. We're all so unique. At the same time, we have these similarities. But I think a lot of the similarities we have are really just cultural things. And they're not necessarily authentic to who we are. But the masculine wants to make things safe for women. So part of that thing where we appear to want to fix you, it's not wanting to fix you. It's like, we don't understand, you're just having an emotion. And you're cool with your emotions. And you're big on emotions and you love having emotions. We don't recognize that. We often think, oh, this is like she's upset. We need to fix this. So it's not coming from a place of wanting to control necessarily. It may be coming from a place of simply wanting to do the thing that has us feel like we're being useful.
That's exactly the word I was thinking, was useful.
Mm.
But sounds like there's no cure-all. There's no one way to all of a sudden become this incredible, non-judgmental, present listener. It, for you, has been a practice over years and years and years. It's been a lifestyle. It's been something that you're constantly working towards. And it sounds like sometimes maybe even missing the mark. And again, being curious about it and doing your own inquiries and recultivating, revisiting, and going deeper and deeper within. It's this inquiry into yourself, and that's allowed you to have this inquiry into others as well, and to go and to give them what you wanted and to give yourself what you wanted. And so it's a reciprocal thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it comes out of, I did not feel seen or heard. And so I know what it's like to not have that. And I know how awful it feels. And then I've had the experience of being seen and heard really beautifully and being really admired and cherished and loved. So I know what that feels like. And what would I rather be a proponent of? It's like, what would I rather set up for other people? Because we're not here to feel bad. That's not the purpose of life, is not to feel awful. I think that we want to expand our capacity for joy. And in order to do that, we have to be willing to look at our pain. and not avoid looking at it. And that's tough work because everything in us wants to avoid looking at those painful spots. So I think the work that we do is in service to that, is hopefully to create these containers, or create these places where people can actually look at these things, where they're not judging it and other people are not judging it, where you're just looking at it really neutrally and saying your story without any charge, not trying to elicit sympathy, not getting caught up in the drama of it, but just saying, this is something that happened. Because I think when we do that, we neutralize them. When we're able to do that, they're no longer running us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So is there anything else that you want to tell nice guys?
Well, you just brought up the point of reciprocation. So I don't know if this is necessarily for the nice guys as it is for the women, but for men to be aware of. It's like, if men keep giving and giving and giving, and they're not getting anything in return, they're going to be drained. There has to be reciprocation. It has to be reciprocal. The man needs to feel appreciated. And the appreciation can come in any form. You cook him a meal, rub his feet, whatever. But if a man is going to pour his attention into a woman, and the woman is going to receive that attention, then I think there is a natural response to want to give back. And I think that works beautifully. But if those two things aren't there, if the giving and the receiving aren't there, then you're not going to have a relationship that's going to function well. And the wheels are going to come off of it.
Do you think it's appropriate for a man just to say, I need to feel appreciated?
I don't know if I would put it that way. I would certainly say it would be great if you did this, or would you like to do something for me? Would you be interested in knowing what I would like? Does that interest you at all? It's a great question, because we're not taught to ask for what we want, really. I think one of the really beautiful things about preference and consent forms in DS scenes and BDSM is that you have this whole form that is really comprehensive, that says, this is what I'm a yes to, this is what I'm a no to, this is what I'm a maybe to, this is how much of a yes I am. You're dialing it in so that we're not having to guess. And people in relationships really ought to have that. Really ought to sit down and go, this is what my preferences are, having nothing to do with the other person. But this is just where I'm a yes and where I'm a no, so that there isn't as much of a chance of a misstep. And then if you change your mind about something in a scene, if you're doing a dominant submission scene, you can always change a yes to a no. You can always change your mind about something, but you can't change a no to a yes in the midst of a scene. And so I think that's a really good tool. I don't know if that would be useful to your listeners, because it seems like a kind of a left field comment, but it's one way that I've found of having very clean relationships with women, is to be very clear about what they want. And it's amazing. The amazing thing is women get to ask for what they want in the context of this. And it's just a short commitment, but you get to have the thing that you want without there being any long-term obligation.
I think it's relevant because everything we're talking about is power play. When we're talking about men and women, they come together. It's a mixture of, like, I kind of imagine it like kids, like our inner child is present in this relationship and our trauma is trying to trump the other person, trying to keep us safe. It becomes this weird power dynamic where it's like, what do I need to do to keep myself safe? What do I need to say? Do I need to blow up? Do I need to shut down? And how do I gain control of this situation? And ultimately, people who are codependent are trying to control the situation. So it's a power thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds like two people playing head games with each other, which is not useful either.
Right.
So yeah, that's why I think it's great, because it would be like, oh, this is what she likes. This is what she wants. And it's awesome, because if I do this, I'm going to win with her. This is how I win with her. And so relationships, you do the same thing, just tamer. To say, I really like it when I have a coffee in the morning. I have a coffee waiting for me in the morning. I really like it when I come home from work and I have this waiting for me. I like it when I've sent you a text and you respond and let me know that you can't respond right away, but that you got it, that you acknowledge that you got it. Like things like that.
I think men would be surprised, especially nice guys would be surprised at how well women respond to him or men saying what they want. Just straight up, especially in the bedroom, but just straight up, just saying, this is what I want. This is how I want it. This is when I want it, whatever the thing is. And you have to have some tact. And so if you're talking about a sandwich and you go, make me a sandwich, like obviously she's not your personal slave and mommy. So I think there's some nuance here. I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Men asking for what they want straight up sounds great. This is what I like in bed. In the bedroom, I like to be dominant. And I want my women to be submissive. And I want to be able to put all my attention on you, and I just want you to receive. And then on from there. And if there are more specific things, you go into more specific things. But fundamentally, you want to just state that. If that's the case, that's the thing you want. If you feel like, if as a man, you like, you know what, at the end of the day, I like to just like lay back and receive. And you do that and see how that lands. And you play with it. You can go back and forth and you can play all positions.
What about the sandwich conversation? Because I think some guys shy away from stating what they want because it can come across as domineering, chauvinistic, controlling. We've got the Me Too movement. We've got a lot of stigma around men being assertive, or we're paranoid about them being aggressive because aggressive men have hurt so many people. So there's this fear around just coming out with it. What is it that you want? What is it that you need? So what does that look like in a healthy way outside of the bedroom for the man to state what he wants or state what he needs without being aggressive? And I would preface it by saying we're assuming that the connection is there.
Right. Well, you could simply say, I have a desire. May I share it with you? And then wait for the response. And then if it's a yes, say what you want. And if you feel awkward, if you feel like it's really confronting, say that too. It's like, I'm a little nervous about this, but I have this desire. Can I share this with you? Is it okay if I share it with you?
Beautiful. So that way you're not coming across as chauvinistic or anything like that. And she knows what you want and you get your needs met. It's a win-win.
Well, the thing of it is, Ashley, before you get to that point, you're going to know how this guy feels in your system. If the guy's a chauvinist, if the guy's a jerk, you're going to know that already. And nothing he says is going to make a difference anyway. But what you're talking to is a man who actually really genuinely wants to connect with a woman and wants to please her. And he has a desire that he wants to share. Yeah. It's coming from a whole other place. And you will also receive it differently.
Yeah. One is repulsive and the other one is attractive. Depending on where the man is coming from in his heart and in his system and in his body. Is he coming from an insecure place where he needs to dominate and control because he's insecure and he's anxious and he needs you to be within this box for him to be okay because he hasn't increased his window of tolerance, or he cares about how people view him, or is he in his purpose and his power present and just really aware of himself and connected to himself and communicating from that space?
Yeah. And what you're doing is you're doing a favor to the other person because you're letting them know what you want, what you would appreciate, and what would give you the juice to return to want to keep giving to them.
Yeah. This is beautiful. So we're talking about just open communication, being present with yourself and others and communicating.
Yeah. And it's up to both partners. It's up to both people. And here's the thing, women are getting trained by women. Men are getting trained by men. And it's like, when they come together, it can be an amazing thing when there are communities around it. And where do you find those people? It's, you know, it's still a jungle out there. It doesn't take away all the challenge of actually connecting. It's still there, but what I'm speaking about is the men's work and the women's work and where they come together. There's a lot of women's work that is encouraging women to step into their power, which is beautiful. And to find a man who is going to find that attractive and is going to be in his masculine, who is going to meet you where you want to be met, is going to be difficult, because you're talking about women who are in their masculine wanting men who will be in their masculine so that they can surrender, so that they don't have to be in their masculine when they're with these men. And it's like all of those things are present. And so I don't know what the end of that sentence is,
And
but it's just
lasting. Or you could just surrender to begin with.
Or you could just surrender to begin with. Yeah. Yeah. And surrendering is an art form as well.
You're like, okay, she wants to be in her masculine, so she wants a man who is more masculine than her, so she can be in her feminine. So why not just be in your feminine?
Yeah. It's, well, I mean, and then it's a trust issue. Can I trust this man? Is this man trustable? Is this man actually going to be able to hold me? And that's, you know, that's men's work. That's where men have to come to embody that, to actually feel safe. So it's a lot of things.
If someone's insecure or reactive, it can be difficult for them to be that container for the woman. And so that's where the men's work comes into play.
If you are reactive, you're not the container. if you're reacting, you can't be the container. If you want to be a container, you have to be still, and you have to be grounded, and you have to have your attention out, because all those things are felt on an energetic level. And that's where it starts. It's all energetic. It's not what you're saying. It's not how you say it. It's not any of that. It's energetic.
And what you're saying would repel unhealthy women who are in their masculine, and it would attract healthy women who are in their feminine. Just energetically, that's how that would work.
Well, I think generally, if we were to make a blanket statement, I think that would be one. I wouldn't make that statement though, because there are all sorts of like, it's not an either or proposition. But I think if you hold your space, if you're clear about where you are and you're true to that, then the right people will be gravitating towards you. And then you'll get those reflections, and that will reinforce.
As opposed to creating a mask and an inauthentic version of yourself to get a desired outcome.
Yeah, then you don't know who you're dealing with.
True.
Then you have no idea who you're dealing with, really. Which is why suddenly, I mean, there are stories where men are like, they're in these relationships and they think it's great, and all of a sudden the woman disappears. I mean, vanishes. I've heard stories like that. That doesn't just happen. I imagine that's something that took a long time coming. And the one person did not feel that they could be honest, or they got caught up in this thing. But their story had nothing to do with the man they were in a relationship with. It was all about themselves. And so one day they couldn't do it anymore. They couldn't pretend to be engaged with this person anymore, or something flipped. People are complex.
They are.
Yeah.
And the more authentic you can be, the more it gives someone else permission to be authentic, which is nice.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's not just permission. It's like, if this person's being authentic, you have to be authentic, or what are you doing? And how long can that possibly last?
True. It's raising the bar or the standard, which is why it becomes the container for the man. If I'm a man and I'm listening to this, I'm the only one I can control. So if I want my relationship to be authentic and to be connected and to be sexy and happy and safe, then it starts with me being authentic and holding that container and being still and doing all those things. So then it gives her permission to relax and respond accordingly.
Yeah. And you have to show up too.
Do you have any final thoughts for the listeners?
No, hopefully this will be helpful.
I think so. Where can people find you, Jack?
They can go to jackhuntercohen.net. It's just recently been a Facebook group created for the Witness Circle. If anyone listening to this is interested, they can find it on Facebook. And if they want to join, they can fill out a little questionnaire. And if it seems like something that resonates, then I'm happy to have them.
I think it'd be a beautiful practice for anybody listening to be in the Witness Circle and to be seen and heard finally, maybe for the first time. Thank you, Jack. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights and your wisdom. And I know that it's going to be helpful.
Thank you so much, Ashley. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Podcast for Nice Guys. For more Nice Guy tips, follow Ashley at Nice Guy Reform School on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. See you next time on A Podcast for Nice Guys.